Hey guys, I want to talk to you about gaining your freedom. By gaining your freedom, I mean financial freedom. Because since I've been debt free, I've had the freedom to do what I want and live how I want. You can enjoy a financially free life where you don't owe anything to anyone. Now, being debt free has less to do with how much you make, but more about how much you save. There are people who make 1 million, but then they end up spending two. I rather make much less, but save much more. The common thought process when it comes to money management is already programmed into our minds. In our culture, we're taught from an early age to start building our credit. Building your credit means that you're supposed to consistently borrow money and pay it back on time to prove that you're a responsible debtor. As you continue this cycle, you build your credit, allowing you to borrow even more money, whether it's to buy a house, car, or even start a business. It's much easier or more convenient to buy something right away with money you don't have as opposed to actually saving up for it and buying it cash. Like the old fashioned way. There's an old saying which goes, debt is the slavery of the free. Back in the day, debt used to be a last resort when it came to buying something. People used to take out debt, as an absolute necessity. Believe it or not, people in many countries around the world still pay for a home in cash. It's interesting how the mindset has shifted over time. In the past, people used to be ashamed to take on debt. People used to buy what they could afford with money they actually had. People used to live within their means. Nowadays, the quote unquote financial experts tell you not to pay off your home even if you have the money. They tell you that it's smarter to keep your mortgage and invest in the market to get back higher returns. This is why majority of the Americans end up dying with unpaid debt, with the average amount being $62,000 in debt. It's no wonder why we're in a debt crisis as a people and even as a nation. Now let's take it back to the Quran and Sunnah to see how we should be dealing with debt. There are plenty of references from the Quran and Sunnah as it relates to money management and debt. I want to reference a couple hadith as they relate to debt. In the first hadith, there was a man who came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him to perform his nikah or marriage ceremony. The Prophet ﷺ asked, "Do you have anything to give as a dowry or a wedding gift?" The man was a poor person and he replied by saying that he had nothing. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Go back home, see if you can give anything and bring it back, whether it's a ring that's gold, silver, or if nothing else, even a ring made from iron." The poor person came back and he said, "I still don't have nothing." The Prophet ﷺ asked the person, "Do you know any chapters from the Quran? Like, do you have some verses memorized?" And the man replied that, "Yes, I have a couple chapters memorized from the Quran." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "That's fine. I will marry you based on this. You can give this as your dowry or wedding gift. You can teach the verses that you know from the Quran to your wife. This would be sufficient as the gift." Then there's another hadith where there was a companion who had passed away. And before the Prophet was about to perform the janazah for this person, the funeral prayers, he asked the companions, "Does this deceased person owe any debt?" And the companions replied, "Yes, Ya Rasulullah, this person owes 2 dinars." And the Prophet ﷺ asked, "Did this person leave behind any money to be able to repay his debt or clear his debt?" And the companions replied, "Ya Rasulullah, this person did not leave any money behind to repay his debt." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Go ahead and continue with the janazah for this person." And he was about to leave and he refused to perform the janazah for this person. And before he left, one of the companions said, "Ya Rasulullah, I will repay this person's debt. I will take the responsibility to clear his debt." And the Prophet ﷺ confirmed and reaffirmed that this person was willing to repay this person's debt. And once that was finalized, then the Prophet ﷺ agreed only then to pray the janazah or the funeral prayers for this person. So, subhanallah. Then, not only that, but after the Prophet ﷺ continuously followed up with the companion who agreed to pay off the debt and made sure and followed up that, did you pay this debt off yet? And he kept asking until it was cleared off. And then once the companion confirmed that, Ya Rasulullah, yes, I repaid this person's debt, then the Prophet ﷺ replied, this deceased person's skin has been cooled off. Subhanallah. So, as you can see, although debt is not haram, our deen does encourage us to live within our means and avoid leaving this world with any debt. And in the first hadith, the Prophet ﷺ could have told, that poor person to go take some debt to be able to give dowry. But he didn't do that. He made do with whatever the poor person had, and in this case, he had nothing. All he had was, the knowledge of the noble Quran in his head, and the Prophet ﷺ deemed this as sufficient in terms of offering this as the dowry. So, from these hadith that I just referenced, it's clear that our deen definitely encourages us to live within our means. So, what does it exactly mean to live within our means? So, here's some practical examples. Let's suppose you have cash to buy a Toyota, but then you go into debt to buy a Mercedes. That is an example of not living within your means. Similarly, let's say you have cash to buy a modest home that's 2,000 square feet, but then you instead go into debt to buy a home that's 4,000 square feet. This is also considered not living within your means, right? So let me just quickly tell you some benefits that I've gained so far from being debt free. Number one, if you die tomorrow and you're debt free, you won't have to deal with repercussions that were just mentioned in the hadith earlier. Number two, I was able to take calculated risks early on in my career and move from job to job and take higher level positions. And as a result, get substantial pay bumps every move I made. And I wouldn't be able to easily do that. I realized had I had debt, I wouldn't be as easily able to have done that because I'd be worried about, oh, what if it doesn't pan out? I still have all this debt that I have to deal with, right? Number three, if you don't have any debt, you can give more, and as a result, you can give more in zakat as well, right? And the more you give, the more Allah Azza wa Jal gives back to you. If you don't get it back right away, you may get it back later, and if you don't get it back later, you'll certainly get it back in the hereafter, right? And number four, when the economy crashes or is impacted, like in recent history, we had the '08 housing crash. So many people lost their jobs, their livelihoods, and so many people were impacted. Or what we're dealing with right now, the pandemic, and how it's impacting our economy. So many people have lost their jobs, or because they're sick, they're not able to work, right? Now, if you have debt, it would be much more difficult to navigate, your day-to-day life as opposed to if you were debt free, obviously. And then lastly, number five, when you buy something cash, it just feels better compared to if you would have bought it with debt, right? When you pay cash for something, you're much less likely to impulse buy, leading you to save even more money. Now, the question is, how do you get out of debt? A lot of people tend to think that you need a high income to get out of debt. Again, it's more about how much you save rather than how much you make. Number one, you have to be disciplined, and most importantly, you have to have a budget. Number two, you need to live within your means. Now, unfortunately, in the back of our heads, many of us tend to have this thought that the laws of our deen are sort of outdated, or not applicable based on the circumstances that we're in today in this modern day and age, and the way our economics work. Um, we come up with all sorts of excuses. However, we should know that the guidance of the Quran and the Sunnah applies to our lives until the end of time. This is a promise from Allah Azza wa Jal. Now, no matter how much debt you're in, know that you can become debt free and inshallah be financially free. So there's a quote that's relevant to this topic, and it goes, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Again, it always seems impossible until it's done. Inshallah, you have to make dua and go get what you want. That's the mindset that you need to accomplish anything. So, guys, hopefully this gives you something to think about and gets you motivated to get out of debt. If you found this information beneficial, please do hit the like button to help with the YouTube algorithm so this message benefits others as well, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khair, guys. Inshallah, I will see you guys in the next video. Assalamu alaikum.